Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rock Cut Review. My name is Professor Richard J. Agoff. Uh-oh, I forgot to turn it off on my phone. It's going to start coming out there in a second. And today we're going to be learning about the laws behind whiskey. Won't that be fun? It's going to get real nerdy up in here. Who's ready to learn? I am a professional professor of whiskey and getting drunk in the gutter, so you can trust me to know exactly what I'm doing. Who's all in the chat right now? Wheels is showing up, but he's not drinking tonight. That's okay. We love you anyway, Wheels. Thank you for coming in. Brad LeClaire, who again switched his streaming time for some reason, says he's here to kill brain cells, but not teach them stuff. That's okay. You can just drink along. Cohen, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you liked the video. Yeah, Japanese whiskey will be coming out next week. Hey, Floyd, how you doing? Andrew Spirell's in, and Mr. Goings-On himself, Mark JG. I know, right? Right? Don't I look clever? Even though there's absolutely no frames in these. Hey, Jason, how you doing? Oh, you got to pick up the kid. All right, fair enough. No drinking for you. No drinking for you. Don't drive drunk. That's bad. Jeremy is streaming. Yeah, I'm a professor of law. I don't actually practice. I'm a professor of law at Douchebag University. What's my PhD in? Ishkabaha, and like I said, getting drunk in the gutter. I studied 8 long years of getting drunk in the gutter just to get that degree. Joto, yes, we're gonna be talking about them quite a bit tonight. Trust me, don't worry. They're gonna be coming up quite a bit. Ooh, I'm gonna get hot in this jacket. I can already tell. May have to ditch the lawyerly garb. I know I need some leather patches. Well, I originally was gonna wear a tweed jacket, but then I realized it had a rip in it, and so I had to switch out for the black one, and it doesn't quite work as well. It's not as an effective a look. Yeah, you can never pass the bar. Ah, Jeremy, you devil. Okay, so before we get into the meat of the stream today, which is going to be whiskey lawyerings. I was inspired to do this because we were talking about spirit whiskey in a recent video. And I was thinking about the regulations that kind of make that what it is. And I was thinking, let's just dive in. We got a lot of nerdy people here. Some of you probably already know a lot of this stuff because, I mean, we're all a bunch of whiskey nerds. But for people who don't, this will be fun. And I was also thinking, like, if this goes well, because there's so much out there. Obviously, we're not going to get into a lot of it tonight. It would be fun to do this stream, do it as a stream, talk about as much as we can, and then get into the like nitty-gritty in a series of videos. So that could be fun. But yeah, I'm thinking that may be what we're gonna do. Oh yeah, the new Old Tub videos. Yeah, now that Jim Beam is calling itself Old Tub again. Everything that's old is new, isn't it? I haven't actually seen that around at all, so I don't know if that's coming to Wisconsin. I mean, I would assume it would. But before we get started, I did want to talk about one thing that I completely missed. I'm just going to pull this over from, where is it? Whiskey Wash. That, yeah, Jameson, the folks over at Middleton just switched things up big time. So Brian Nation, the master distiller, he is actually coming over to America to work as the distiller at the O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company out of Minneapolis. Now, O'Shaughnessy, I believe, doesn't actually have any whiskey on the market yet. But That's kind of exciting because it's going to be really cool if we have an American distillery making Irish style stuff. I would love to see more people take a crack at the pot still style whiskey. The only problem with having this up is there's all these ads blinking. That's annoying. But yeah, so that means this gentleman, Kevin O'Gorman, is going to be taking over as master distiller. And then they've got a young lady whose name I've forgotten, Catherine Condon. She is going to be taking over as the day-to-day distiller, taking care of all the pot and grain whiskey. So that's all very exciting. It's going to be interesting. I don't think too much will change at Middleton. Obviously, we've heard rumors coming out of Middleton that some of the lines, such as Redbreast Cask Strength, is going to be losing its age statement. Stuff like that. We've been hearing murmurings about changes to the main line over at Middleton. I don't think this has anything to do with that. I think that was probably stuff that was already planned. But it'll be interesting to see if anything else changes now that they're changing distillers and blah, blah, blah. I got a feeling it won't. I mean, at this point, Middleton's like a giant ship. Like, there's really no changing direction. It's a freaking ocean liner. You don't just turn it around. They're going to do, whatever stuff. No, Andrew Spirell, I put most of my searches in incognito. So yeah, but that's exciting. The exciting thing is the O'Shaughnessy Distillery over in Minneapolis. I'm really excited to see what they're going to come out with. Because if it's just, well, here's the thing. If it's just your standard, they're going to come out with a gin and then a bourbon and then a rye, just like every other American distillery. Okay, that's kind of boring. It's been done a million times. Who really cares? But if they're going to come out with some they're going to bring Brian Nation in, do some freaky deaky Irish American hybridization kind of stuff. Like, I would love to see a high rye pot still style whiskey. That would be awesome. They can't call it pot still, obviously, but do it in a similar style as pot still in Ireland. Do it with a bunch of rye, which they're not allowed to do over in Ireland right now because Middleton leaned on the government. Yeah, do stuff like that. Mess with it. Do some crazy stuff. Hey, Cliff, how you doing? Andrew, there is actually Andalusia, I believe, has a triple distilled malt, which is very similar to an Irish style malt. So they're actually doing that right now. I don't believe anyone's actually taken a crack at doing a pot still style unmalted barley. I mean, I guess Whistlepig technically did an unmalted barley blend, but that really wasn't. It really wasn't pot still style. That was a blend of unmalted barley blended in with other whiskeys. That's not quite the same thing. Dustin says he wants Google to know about the porn. Fair enough. Fair enough. Also, oh, nice. Yeah, Bourbon Bites is on at 8:30. I mean, you can't watch both of us, unfortunately, because I'm going to be going till 9. I guess I could start going at 7:30 if Cask Strength's not going to be on around then. Maybe then I'd actually be able to catch Clifton's stream live. I'll have to talk to the Cask Strength boys and see what they're doing. But yeah, make sure you go check him out as well. Replay it or replay me. I don't really care. I have more viewers than Tank Stream. Yeah. That's good. Anyway, also Clifton, I want to have a stream with you. One of these Thursdays, maybe we could do a gaming stream. That would be fun. We could do like a 7 to 9 gaming stream. I'd be way down for that. So we'll talk after. Anyway, enough about the news, enough about Irish American whiskey, which I'd love to see. I mean, Brothership did it, Sons of Aaron did it, but those weren't actually like Irish style made in America. Those were Irish whiskey either blended here or blended with American whiskey. not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone to really go for an Irish style, like made here in the States. Let's try it. Let's try it. Hey, Patty, how you doing, man? Good to see you. Patty just had a great Colkegan stream. What was that, on Monday? Go check that out. Go check out the replay of that. Yeah, we should do Dragons and Drams or Dungeons and Drams or whatever the hell we called it. That was fun. Okay. Let's talk lawyering. All right, let's talk about this. So I was actually doing a lot of research for this stream, and I think this would actually make a really fun series to break down everything that's like just how this stuff developed. Because really, anytime you start talking about the laws in America, we're talking about American law here. We're not going to talk about Canadian law, Irish law, Scotch law, none of that. Just because that's there's enough crazy bullshit going on in American law already that we're not going to need. I think we can wait on doing Irish and Scottish for a minute. Canada, I have no idea what the fuck's happening north of the border. Canadian law is fucking weird. I'm pretty sure as long as you don't put Canadian on your bottle, you can just make some fucking crazy ass whiskey just for export, like with what they did with Fireball. So yeah, we'll get into that at some point too, I'm sure. But anytime you got to talk about this stuff, you start with two organizations, the ATF and the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, also known as the TTB. So the history of these two is actually very interesting because TTB is the current regulatory body that is basically in charge of making sure that the government gets its tax money, right? At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. I mean, there is always like a public health consideration as well. And, they're in charge of the advertising, the labels, blah, blah, blah. But really, it's about getting the tax money. It developed out of an organization in the Treasury Department. So end of the 1800s, Treasury Department creates this thing that was basically the Revenue Lab. And that was essentially the precursor to the TTB. Then you get the Volstead Act during Prohibition. So the Prohibition Amendment passes, what was that, 1920, 21? And basically it says we're going to outlaw intoxicating liquors. However, at that time, they didn't define what intoxicating liquors were. So a lot of people who voted for the amendment, right, because in America, if you want to pass an amendment, you have to put it to a vote in the states. A lot of people who voted for the amendment didn't realize that intoxicating liquors was going to refer to beer. A lot of people assumed that Prohibition was simply banning hard liquor, 20% and up. So yeah, they really weren't thinking about like beer and wine. However, the Anti-Saloon League, in conjunction with Senate or House Member Volstead, the name of the act is the Volstead Act. He was the House Judiciary Committee member who was in charge of guiding the legislation. Those two in conjunction basically made anything above 0.5% alcohol illegal. So that included pretty much everything. I mean, you can make like non-alcoholic beer and it can be like 0.5%, but you'd have to drink like 60 of them to get drunk. So basically, a lot of Americans were very surprised by this when this came out. It's like, wait, that doesn't sound like what I voted for. I thought I could still drink beer. But that creates the Bureau of Prohibition. So that's the Elliot Ness guys, right? And because this is now an actionable offense in a criminal court, the Bureau of Prohibition gets moved from the Treasury Department over to the Justice Department. It was briefly also part of the FBI. I think that was around the end of the 30s. It was very briefly part of the FBI before being moved back into its own fucking thing. So yeah, so now you've got the Bureau of Prohibition, and they're basically, which is the alcohol enforcement unit. So obviously, prohibition is fucked up. Basically, every criminal organization in the country takes advantage of it to start making bootleg liquor. Bootleg liquor is in high demand. They start selling it to everybody. Al Capone gets rich. You know, the mafia as a whole suddenly becomes a much more prosperous and influential organization than it ever had been previously to Prohibition. It doesn't really work out. Now, to be fair, did it curtail alcohol abuse? There's debate on that to this day, whether or not it actually affected anything. But what we do know is it did lead to a whole lot of motherfuckers drinking poison liquor. So people would start drinking Pruno, denatured alcohol, you know, whatever the fuck they could get their hands on. Really fucked up shit. A lot of people died. A lot of people were poisoned because the government started denaturing alcohol specifically to discourage people from drinking it. Something like 100 people died in New York in one night simply because they were drinking denatured alcohol that the government had purposely poisoned. It's fucked up. But that was the situation. People still wanted their booze. They didn't really realize how much they wanted it till it was gone. So, but coming out of Prohibition, it gets repealed in steps. First of all, you get near beer, so 2% alcohol beer gets legalized again. Eventually, the whole act gets repealed. Now you have the TTB. The TTB really comes out of the whole thing because the ATF gets moved back to the Treasury Department. The ATF is no longer like a criminal investigative unit. So now they're back with the Treasury Department. And their job is now the alcohol tax unit. Their job is to ensure that everyone is paying their taxes on their booze. So now you have something called the Federal Alcohol Act, which basically, a little bit down the line, creates the TTB, which comes out of the ATF. The Federal Alcohol Act basically creates the TTB as a regulatory agency, meaning that it has a wide berth to create and enforce regulation within the United States for interstate commerce of alcohol. Now, that's the tricky part, though. Interstate commerce. Okay, the federal government can't technically regulate anything within a state's jurisdiction. So really, right now, Prohibition didn't technically end, as it were. It really just became an issue of the state, a state's rights kind of issue, where each state can now make decisions based on their personal stuff. I don't think Mississippi technically got rid of statewide prohibition until way later than everybody else. Each state can make its own rules, and each county can now make its own rules related to distribution, selling, whatever they want. The one thing that the federal government gets to have control over is the labeling and advertising of spirits intended for interstate commerce. So that brings up an interesting issue. The TTB, let's see here. So I'm going to, if you look at, let's make sure I get the right one. All right, looking at TTB ruling 2016-3. This is going to get real legalese, people. Hope you're ready. I hope you like text, because yeah, this is where it's coming in. So, statutory authority of the TTB says, pursuant to the Federal Alcohol Administration Act 27 U.S.C. 205 E and F, vests broad authority in the Secretary of the Treasury to prescribe regulations with the respect of labeling, advertising of wine, distilled spirits, and malt beverages that are introduced into interstate or foreign commerce or imported into the United States of America. So, basically, the TTB has control over interstate commerce. So what if I, as a liquor producer, right, want to only sell within my state, right? Technically, the TTB doesn't actually, you know, under the FAA doesn't technically have regulatory agency over that. But nonetheless, if you're going to make a label, you can't just start selling stuff in your own state. You still have to apply to the TTB and tell them, hey, I want to make liquor and sell it within my own state. I need you to exempt me from the regulations related to interstate commerce, right? That way I can sell it within my own state. So you still have to apply to the TTB. You can't just start putting labels on shit and selling it, you know, down the block. You still have to let the TTB know what you're doing, and then they have to give you approval to say, okay, you're operating within your state, cool. We're not gonna worry about that, right? Pretty simple. Okay, so let's get into the actual regulations of the TTB. Because growing up, whoa, and one other thing. I want to point out one other thing that looks at the, when you're looking at the, hey, AJ Lopez coming in with us. A sweet little super chat. Doing the old, what is, oh, Jay and Silent Bob. Motherfuck. Noise. Yeah. Man, it's been forever since I watched that movie. Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love you, AJ. And actually, get a hold of me on Facebook or wherever. We should talk, because if you're the only one who does super chat tonight, I think you deserve a sample from the collection. You know, so I think that's the thing. A random person at the end of the night, whatever you want. Whoever does super chats at the end of the night, I'll pick a random one. We'll pass along some good shit. Your choice of what you want. So I'm gonna write down that was AJ. My jungle love. Okay. But yeah. All right. Here's a tricky thing about the regulatory powers of the TTB, because you're going to notice that what I just said, the statutory authority applies specifically to wine, distilled spirits, and malt beverages, right? So what does that leave out? It actually leaves out hard cider. So the TTB can't regulate hard cider until it actually reaches a certain ABV. So hard cider up until 9.1% alcohol or so, I forget the exact number, is actually regulated by the federal, the Food and Drug Administration. So if you look at a lot of hard ciders, they're actually going to have Food and Drug required information on them if they're below a certain alcohol percentage. After a certain percentage, though, that now again becomes the purview of the TTB. It's super weird. It's super strange. But technically, under federal law, there are only certain things the TTB is able to regulate, even if other things have alcohol in them. Go figure. Fucking, that's fucking federal law for you, man. So, oh, speaking of which, I'm drinking a little sweet wheat, 1792. I don't know what is everyone else drinking tonight. I would be curious to know. Mike is triple streaming. It's this, the cat stream feed, and a hamster feed. Is it just his fish still? Aaron Hardiman, that's actually a fantastic question. And not one I know the answer to, actually. I'm not sure what rules the FDA works under. Because I know with the TTB, obviously, you get taxed on your proof gallons, right? I don't know if that's the same case for the FDA, or if they have some other way of calculating that. Yeah, it's a weird issue. That's something I may have to do research into. So, yeah. Looks like a lot of old folks aren't drinking yet. Looks like they're, oh, fish and hamster wheel now. All right, nice. Oh, nice. Okay. Blended old pepper, Dustin. Cool. Hey, Emily, good to see you. I'll break out some rye. I'll break out some rye later. So, okay. That's actually a good segue. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some categories. How about some categories? Some categories. Because this is kind of where it gets fun and a little trippy. Let's see here. I want to share. Which one do I want to share? This one. Okay. So Chapter 4 of the TTB regulations. This is from the TTB themselves. This is class and type designation. So this basically gives you the rundown of it, you know, more or less how every single liquor in this country is defined. And actually, this is not bad, but if you want the good stuff, man, Cornell has a fantastic, let's see here. They have a fantastic resource. Let's see here, standards of identity. Yeah, this is actually way better. It's much more clearly written. You don't have to look at all the effing little lines and stuff. Oh, hey, Mr. Weddleton. Good to see you, buddy. How you been, dude? Glad to see you. Actually, and of course, the Whiskey Weddle is a distiller down at Heaven Hill, so he probably knows even more about this than I do. He would probably be the one to pick the brain of about this sort of thing. Oh, Brad's on the Lagwood. Nice. And hey, how you doing? Good to see you, Scott. Map Urban Journey, everybody. Gotta love it. All right. Yeah, so talking about, this is actually a great resource. Chapter 4 really breaks down every single whiskey in the categories of the TTB. However, it's not actually a complete definition. We'll talk about that in a second. It gets especially fucked up when it comes to distilled whiskey specialty as well as rye whiskey. Rye whiskey and blends of straight whiskeys. Those get really fucked up, and you'll see why in a minute. But for now, we can just run down these definitions. Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure they do. I have no doubt about that. Oh, Floyd says he needs the exact copy of this copy of the syllabus. So, a lot of this, I'm sure you guys know. So, class 2, whiskey. Alcoholic distillate from a fermented mash of grain produced at less than 190 proof, aka 95% alcohol, in such a manner that the distillate possesses the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to whiskey, stored in oak containers, except for corn whiskey, bottled not less than 80 proof. and can include such mixtures of distillates for which no specific standards of identity are prescribed. Okay, that's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. But basically, I mean, the basic idea is undifferentiated whiskey in the United States can be distilled up to just below 95% alcohol, so near vodka. Pretty much nobody's doing that. I mean, the only people who are doing that are really the ones who are mixing it in with neutral grain spirits to make spirit whiskey. But technically, if you see undifferentiated whiskey on the label, it could mean it was distilled up to just under 95%. However, it could also mean that it is a blend of whiskeys, right, that simply doesn't have regulations already on the books. So for example, let's break out some, where's my Rieger? There it is. There's my baby. Come here, you. All right, let's break out my Rieger. So Rieger's a fun one because it's actually just labeled as Kansas City whiskey, right? Now this one is an interesting thing because it's actually a blend of corn malt and rye whiskeys, which we'll talk about the definitions for those in a second, with a trace amount of sherry. So that's a funny thing. We're going to talk about blending materials in a minute. Blending materials get weird, okay? And the regulations on blending materials are super fucky. And they're really not made clear about what the fuck is going on with them. Emily Chambers, what's an example of spirit whiskey? I was actually going to save that one, but I just did a review for the Worst Whiskey Watch recently. This is Blue Ox spirit whiskey. So this is actually 70%. This is 70% grain neutral spirits mixed with 30% whiskey. Now, but it's 30% not straight whiskey. Okay, that's something to remember. So we're going to talk. Well, we can talk about spirit whiskey now, I guess. Spirit whiskey is a weird one. This one was created just after Prohibition, with the intent that people who didn't have any aged stock of whiskey could immediately put whiskey out for the general public. There was no aged whiskey anywhere. And so people who were just starting up their distilleries again needed to put out a product as quickly as possible. So 5% highly distilled, very underaged whiskey mixed with 95% grain neutral spirits or just neutral spirits, period. That became a whiskey category. The fucked up thing, of course, is that stayed on the books. There's really no need for it anymore. Prohibition was a long time ago. There's been plenty of time for people to age shit and blend shit and blah, blah, blah. But there are some people who are still making it. One, because it's quicker and easier to make. And two, some people are trying to corner the market on like vodka drinkers, right? Like spirit whiskey, you know, if you don't age it like at all, it's basically just slightly like less vodka-y vodka. Yeah. So there are some people who are trying to make non-vodka vodka. Yeah. This is closer to a blended American whiskey, this particular one, in that it's actually older whiskey, aged in oak, and yeah, made to try to taste like whiskey. They did an okay job of it. It's not the worst. But yeah, so Rieger's undifferentiated whiskey. It's actually one I really love. I love sherry. I think, oh, Weddle, did you get a new position? You're a supervisor now? I thought you already were, but maybe I'm crazy. Man, good on you, dude. Yeah, actual vodka doesn't suck. That's the problem, is that if you just make underage whiskey, it's not really comparable to vodka. Vodka's filtered. You're basically just making cheap ass young whiskey. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, but congratulations to Weddle. I thought you were already a supervisor, man. Maybe I'm just crazy. Yeah. Okay, but moving right along. So here's the one probably most people are familiar with. Bourbon whiskey, rye whiskey, wheat whiskey, malt whiskey, rye malt whiskey. Actually, rye malt whiskey, some people might not know. In America, you are allowed to distill things 51% rye in your mash bill, malted rye, you can call it malt whiskey. That's a thing we do. To be fair, malted rye is different from unmalted rye. I mean, so yeah, different taste profile. It's kind of funny though. It's not what the rest of the world would consider malt. Yes, I do, Sir Tannen. I sure do. We're taking this one serious. Tonight's a serious one. I've just been rambling about legalese. I don't know if anyone's listening. I'm having fun. Okay. But yeah, so you probably know this one. Bourbon, 51% corn, distilled to no more than 80 proof, stored in new oak. No minimum age, right? Unless you want to make it straight whiskey. Straight whiskey has to be aged 2 years with an age statement, 4 years without. But here's a fun thing not a lot of people know. And it's also something that the TTB does a terrible fucking job of regulating. It's that technically every whiskey made in America, not including like spirit whiskeys and light whiskeys, that's kind of its own, I don't know, it's its own thing. We'll talk about those in a second. But every whiskey made in America, not aged at least 4 years, is supposed to have an age statement, right? It's not something that shows up in Chapter 4 of the TTB regulations. It's something that was it was something that is technically in one of the TTB rulings, which they release quarterly or occasionally from time to time. But yeah, technically everything is supposed to have an age statement aged under 4 years. The TTB does an absolute shit job regulating that. They're terrible at it. Basically, you find a lot of young whiskeys with absolutely no age statement, and a lot of young American whiskeys get entered in non-age statement categories in like competitions, which really, I mean, they do it because it's like, oh, it's a young whiskey. Everyone else does NAS young whiskeys, blah, blah, blah. Does it really matter? It kind of does, though. Your thing is non-age statement mostly because you didn't follow the rules. Yeah. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. Oh, he was a supervisor, but he's moving to a new position. Hey, cheers, man. Congratulations. Go in. Most Kentucky whiskey is at least 4 years. Yes. Yes, most Kentucky stuff is. Most decent stuff pretty much anywhere in the world is. And most stuff is going to be labeled as straight anyway, so they're going to have an age statement if it's, you know, at 2 years. So there you go. But there's a lot of people who are flouting those rules, either intentionally or unintentionally. I would like to believe that's mostly unintentionally. They don't realize it themselves. There's so many laws on the books already that they're having to deal with, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to believe that people aren't doing it out of malice, but, you know, this is capitalism. People are always going to take shortcuts if they can to make a buck. So, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, and Cohen makes a good point. Not Texas. Yeah, Texas shit is young. Texas shit is young. And it's a good and there's a damn good reason for that. Yeah, that stuff gets so tannic. At least a lot of it does. Some people are playing around with ways to make it less tannic, like the folks over at Iron Root. They're doing a great job. I love that tannic bomb, though. I'm a big fan of big tannic bombs in certain whiskeys. Keep that in mind. I don't think Irish pot still whiskeys do that well with big tannin. Not all scotches do, but like the corn whiskeys they're making down there, Iron Root, Balcones, man, those are fucking amazing. Oh, Jojo says age requirements on the label regulations, not identity. Thank you. That actually makes sense. Good man. Yeah, and actually, if you go to the facts on the TTB, it does say, what do you call it? Age statements for whiskey specifically. So, yeah, which makes it more clear. But you would think they would put that in the identity stuff. I would feel like that would make more sense. But whatever. It's not my it's not my job. But yeah, so then corn whiskey, similar as the other ones, 80% corn, but used or uncharred new oak containers. That's a fun one for me. There's not a lot of people who are actually doing uncharred oak. There's quite a few people who are doing various used oak, just because getting bourbon barrels or having, you've got your own bourbon barrels is super easy, right? Hey, Richie Z popped in. AJ Lopez is saying most established brands are pushing out 4-year spirits now. I don't mind a young Texas spirit. I think I know, but Balcones must have a bunch of old stuff now. Man, their pot still bourbon is so goddamn good. Like, their pot still bourbon and their rye are amazing. So this is Gold Spur corn whiskey, 80% corn and the remainder millet and oats. Yeah. So you don't run into a lot of people distilling with millet and oats here in America. Oats is more common in Ireland. You'll see about 5% oats in a lot of mash bills, but not so much in America. And it's kind of sad because it does make for a really oily distillate. It's kind of fun. But yeah, so aged in used oak here rather than new oak. I mean, it's meant to retain more grain flavor, meant to be, less barrel heavy, much like the original corn whiskeys were, which, I mean, they really did grow out of moonshining or distillation prior to regulation. Not all, moonshiners were illegal, blah, 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 whatever. Non-regulatory distillation. Yeah, and the one thing I will say about corn whiskey, man, is if you don't like corn stink, it's hard to drink, man. This is actually one of the better corn whiskeys I've had. It's not a bad corn whiskey, but even this is pretty fucking ewy. Pretty young ewe, corn stink. Yeah. So you gotta like that corn stink, man. You really do. But I actually like this one. It's fruity. It's a little bit bready. Not bad. I like their bourbon a lot better. They made a bourbon we got to sample. Pretty damn good. Hey, Graham Young. Yes, I am Dick J. Agoff. But yeah, okay. So straight whiskey, right? 2 years old. No flavoring allowed. Now you would think, wait, you can't put flavoring into whiskey anyway, right? You can't do that. Otherwise, you'd have to call it flavored whiskey. Wrong. You can't put flavoring and blending materials into bourbon. Now, this is where it gets fucked up. This is where it gets fucky. Because the TTB, in its infinite wisdom, decided that there were certain things that, let's see here. Which one was it? I believe it was this one. No, it was this one. So the TTB decided that there were certain things that the category traditionally made couldn't use blending materials, flavorings, all that sort of stuff, right? Bourbon being one of them. But in their judgment, this is 2016-3, they basically said that if there are certain brands of whiskey or spirits generally in which there are customarily employed certain blending materials or flavorings with established trade usage, that did not technically change the category of the whiskey or the liquor, whatever. We're talking about whiskey in particular, right? So now this is a weird issue because this was something Templeton Rye ran into. Templeton Rye had two problems. One, they said they were a pre-prohibition whiskey coming out of, where was it? Idaho, Iowa? I think it was Iowa. One of the I's. They said that they were making this themselves. It was MGP sourced. They didn't make it clear on the label that it was distilled in Indiana. That's an issue. The other thing that they were running into was that it's a 4-year-old rye, but it doesn't say straight whiskey on the label. Why is that? It's 4 years old. You should be able to call it straight. No big deal. However, they're actually flavoring it. They're flavoring it. So rye bourbon, whether a bourbon is a straight whiskey or it is just plain old bourbon, you cannot put any kind of flavoring in there. With rye, if it's a straight rye, no flavoring. But if it's just plain rye whiskey, you can flavor that motherfucker up. You can put blending materials in, whatever the fuck you want to do with it. So that was an issue that they were running into, is that they were making these claims about the origin of their rye without being clear about the actual process that was going into it. Now, like, I don't know, does anyone particularly care? Like, I do. Yeah, I do. Like, I would prefer that your distillate not have flavoring in it, and if you're going to put flavoring in it, you ought to be upfront about it. That's my feeling. Is it necessarily a bad rye? No, it's a fine rye. But is it what people expect when they see rye whiskey on the label? Probably not. They're assuming it's distilled 51% rye, all rye flavor, not anything added. So that's an issue. The other thing is that if you are an average consumer, right, and you're looking at bottles, you're never going to know. You're never going to know. You're never going to know what the hell's going on in that bottle if they don't tell you on the label. The other issue being that you're never going to know also because, one, even if you take the time to go and look at the TTB website, you're not going to see it at Standards of Identity. You're not going to see it on the FAQs. You're going to have to go dig in the PDFs of previous releases from the TTB related to their judgments about specific liquor issues. And that's the only time you're actually going to find out what the hell is going on with the flavoring. That's problematic. That's problematic. Not because it's necessarily bad whiskey, but because if, like, God, I'm getting so goddamn warm, you guys. But not because it's bad whiskey, but because you weren't upfront about it. That's fucked. That's fucked. And the government is basically helping you cover it up. They're really not being forthright about it either. Mike Lizak says Templeton let slip that they're adding flavoring on whiskey cast. Oh, that's fucky. Oh, that's amazing though. I love it. So yeah, but that's where the TTB's at with it. Now, this also brings up the issue of Are you going to see flavoring within, you know, your malt whiskey? Are you going to see it within your wheat whiskey? Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually not sure if they've had a regulation on those. I know it's happened with rye. Is that it's okay? I don't know if that's true of other stuff. I'm pretty sure brandy, some brandies, it's okay too. Yeah, but that's kind of where they're at with it, which is fucky. Okay, let's try and run through. We're coming up at the end of our time. Are you guys enjoying this? Is this enjoyable for you? I don't know, because if you want, I'll do more videos like this, just talking about weird fucking legalese. But if nobody's enjoying this, we can. This will be a one-off. Oh, okay, light whiskey. Let's talk light whiskey. Okay, so what was it? 70s, 80s. Vodka is king, right? Vodka is the best. I mean, 50s into the 60s, vodka gets really introduced into the United States. Vodka's taking over. It still is kind of taking over even to this day. It's still kind of the biggest thing in spirits. Flavored vodka is huge. Regular vodka is huge. Blah, blah, blah. But in the 70s and 80s, you know, at the same time that Scotland was having their issues with the whiskey loch, the Irish distilleries had all collapsed. You know, there's 2 distilleries up until the end of the 70s, and then there was 3. So, and then here in the United States, bourbon was losing massive market share to vodka. So pretty much all the distillers who are making whiskey are hurting right now. All the big whiskey making countries are kind of losing out to vodka. So the bourbon folks, they go to the TTB and say, hey, listen, you got to give us a new category for us to compete with vodka, because we're making these heavy, you know, these big heavy things. We've got to age them in new oak. It's really not working out for us. We want to make something that's light and easygoing and can compete with vodka. The TTB says, okay, what about distilling it higher? Okay, sure. We're going to distill it more similar to vodka, first of all. And then the other inspiration was, of course, from corn whiskey, uncharred or used casks. So more similar to grain whiskey as it's made in Ireland and Scotland, right? A higher distillation, a used cask for the aging, which as a category actually kind of creates some interesting opportunities for people who want to do crazy shit. Like if you want to create a highly distilled distillate today and age that shit in like first fill sherry and just see what the fuck happens, now you have a category that you can call it light whiskey. Boom, there you go. But at the time, they weren't really looking to experiment. They're not looking to fuck around with it. What they're doing is trying to make a really, really light distillate to compete with vodka, which is a little funny to me, because technically you already had spirit whiskey on the books. You already had blended whiskey on the books. It seems as though they really could have worked with those two to create a vodka-esque whiskey, but they didn't. They chose to go with light whiskey. And there are still some people making it today and marketing it still as basically the whiskey competitor to vodka. I think that's kind of a missed opportunity. Like, I feel like that light whiskey could very well be more of like something like really high-end grain whiskey is to Scotland. You know, people lose their fucking shit over 30-year-old grain whiskey. People hate grain whiskey regularly. They'll lose their shit over super old grain whiskey. Why couldn't we do that with light whiskey? You know what I mean? Take some chances, make some cool shit, instead of trying to sell it to the general public as a vodka alternative, come up with some freaky ass shit just for us whiskey nerds to play around with. I think that would be super cool. I think that'd be super cool, and I think it's an underutilized category. I just don't think anyone really cares to deal with it. The main people who are making whiskey in the category are just out to make a quick buck. You know, they're just selling to the party crowd. It is what it is. I mean, there's a market for that. I get it. So you can't be too mad. Nathan Clark, who is Kafka-esque? I mean, I guess we're all a little Kafka-esque. Oh, there we go. Michael Zick says MVP makes a very good light whiskey. Cat's Eye in Iowa uses it. Cool. Nice. Oh, rice whiskey. Let's talk about rice whiskey. I've actually got a video coming out about this next week. So Cohen, stick around. Little preview right now. I'm basically going to be talking about what I consider some of the biggest scammery happening in whiskey today as it relates to Japanese whiskey. So that is going to be something that's going to be coming out next week, Wednesday, I believe. Yeah. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's going to be a Japanese heavy week next week, actually. So yeah, that and yeah, technically Floydian. So here's the issue. I'm going to get into this big time in the video, but essentially, it's not a Japanese thing. Shochu is a Japanese thing, barrel-aged shochu. What they sell to America is rice whiskey, and they are not allowed to call it whiskey over there. Yeah. Toki is not. Toki is a blend of malt and grain, not rice. It's allowed to be called whiskey in America, and that's where we're going to get into it. That's where we're going to get into the video. It's allowed to be called whiskey in America. So Toki is all grain. I thought it was malt and grain. I thought it was a blended one. Maybe I'm wrong. That's okay. Baby metal. Man, I haven't listened to baby metal in forever. Oh, it is all grain with malt. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. It is a blended. So, okay, guys, I think that is a good stopping point. This is a good stopping point for the evening. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening to me rant for this long. I appreciate everybody showing up. I need to get out of all these heavy clothes. I am so warm. We've got the AC on and I'm still boiling. So we're going to call it a day. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I don't know if I'm going to do another live stream like this. I mostly did this one because Erica couldn't be here tonight. I think for future live streams, we're going to try to keep it a little bit lighter. But I think I'm going to try to do more legalese kind of whiskey talks, maybe in future videos, like pre-taped videos, not the streams. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check those out, follow along. And until next time, thank you all for tuning in. AJ Lopez, I owe you a sample since you super chatted. And until next time, all of you, make sure to stay safe, stay tuned, and stay rotten.